Good afternoon. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everyone for being here with us today. I'm Mark Bulmer, Superintendent of Minot Public Schools. I wanted this opportunity to go over our plan that we put together for district reintegration. And a couple of things before we begin. First of all, we've had a lot of discussion in our community about a lot of things that are very passionate to people. Whether people should wear masks, not wear masks, whether we should social distance or not. I just want to take this opportunity to say that while passion is great and we appreciate the passion that people might have, it is also, I think, very, very important that we take a little bit of time and think about compassion and linking ourselves to what other people might be thinking and understanding that indeed we have to find a way to move all of this forward that works for everybody. So I ask your understanding and your appreciation for others as we begin moving through this discussion. I'm not going to go through the entire plan today. That plan can be found on our website, www.minot.k12.nd.us. But I do ask that you take a little time to review that plan if you haven't yet. It is a quite detailed plan that breaks down several facets of education and health and safety of all of our staff and students. And it's based on various topics, recess, to classrooms, to hallways, when you get to the building, when you depart from a building. But what we do want to talk is about the main ideas that are in the plan today. So I'm going to switch over to presentation mode. We're going to begin here in just a second, as soon as we can make this happen. Okay, we should be in presentation mode. I again want to thank you for being here. Our motto through all of this is the fact that we are uncertain about many things. The only thing that we are certain about is uncertainty. We have many challenges coming our way. We've had a lot of people looking at this. Okay, hold on one second. Should we just forget the slideshow? Nope, we'll get there. Okay, I apologize for that. We're going to try this again. Hopefully we can hear now, and you can hear my voice as I come through. As we work through all of this and we continue our processes of developing a plan, I mentioned a little earlier, the only thing that we are certain about right now is uncertainty. And we've had a lot of people looking at this plan and pulling together ideas. We've done focus groups with parents, with staff members. We've talked a lot about distance learning. We had a survey that we did for our staff and our community. That was also very helpful in gathering information. And we spent a lot of time working with First District Health and the North Dakota Department of Health and our experts in community health on the Minot Air Force Base to help us along that continuum. You can see here all of the members of our committee, and they are all listed there. Hopefully, it will be helpful to you to know we did have a lot of people looking at this. Our school liaison officer who works on the base, First District Health played an integral role in pulling all of this together, as well as our coordinators, Sarah Hicks, our MEA president, a lot of people that dedicated a lot of time, including principals and administrators and teachers. So we thank everyone for their involvement in that. The roadmap to all of this began on June 3rd when the initial committee was organized. We were at a bit of a standstill at that time. Our determination was essentially we had to figure out exactly what we were going to be dealing with, and we waited for that guidance that came from the governor's office. In that time, though, we did a lot of research, focus groups, as I mentioned before. And then on the 14th of July, Governor Burgum released his North Dakota Smart Restart guidelines, and our committee then went to work and really dug into that, began to look at different options for our committee and community and school. The Reintegration Committee reported to the board on July 23rd. We released a parent and staff survey the very next day. Our reintegration work continued, subcommittee work took place, and on July 31st, we essentially finalized our health plan with the goal of rolling out on August 3rd, which we were able to do. So on Monday, August 3rd, late in the day, we were able to get that plan out. We had our principals and our leadership team review that plan. That brings us up to today, where we had the opportunity to talk a little more about the specifics of the plan and for you to ask questions. So again, you had a link that was sent to you. You can post your questions in there. We have moderators that will be bringing those questions down, and we'll have an opportunity to go through them here at the end of the presentation today. I do want to remind all of you, however, that not every question may be brought down. We'll be kind of combining some questions and doing the best we can to answer those. And at any time, if you don't feel your question was answered, please reach out to the district office or to your child's principal. We'll do the absolute best we can to gather that information, get what you need to help you make some decisions as we move forward. Tomorrow at 4 o'clock, the Minot Public School Board of Education will be meeting. We'll be asking them to approve the plan. They may or may not be modified at that point, but that is our next step. Our goals of the committee were really quite simple. First, our goal was to mitigate virus spread in a congregate setting. Schools are congregate settings. We have a lot of people in a tight space. We want to do what we can do to make sure we mitigate that spread. Secondly, to plan for staff, student, community health and safety. Our schools are not just schools during the day. Our schools are community centers, and often those schools are used by a lot of different agencies. We need to do whatever we can do to keep our school community safe. So we've been working diligently on developing plans. Next, to inspire stakeholder confidence, to make sure that parents know what our safety precautions are, and to provide, if parents feel it's necessary or they prefer to have their child take advantage of the distance learning model we're going to talk about a little later, that they know that our emphasis on point number 4, academic growth, will take place and will happen. So those are 4 overarching goals of our committee. And that committee then began work in moving into 3 separate subcommittees. First, the health and safety plan that was led by Assistant Superintendent Slatsby. They looked at facilities, transportation, food service, health services, the budget, and people. What do we need to be concerned about for hiring practices for staff that may not be able to return to work? So we had that committee, had a lot of discussion about the essence of being in the building during this time. Assistant Superintendent Lawson led the plan to talk about distance learning. There's a few things that need to be done on that plan, but they address a lot of different issues. Curriculum, technology. How can we have the professional learning in place to help teachers with the skills they might need to move to that distance learning plan? How do we take into consideration the needs of students, of teachers, and how do we focus on mental health for staff and for students? How do we make sure that everyone is good and well and whole? The last area is the area of community relations, and that falls under my portfolio. The idea of how can we work on communicating this and how can we talk about moving forward, what steps might take place. You may already know that the governor's office, in conjunction with the North Dakota Department of Health, has adopted a color system that is designed to help us understand where we are at. That color system is listed here. Blue being the new normal, that a period of time where there are very, very few cases of COVID in our state or in our region. Green is an area where we recommend the school would be fully operational with additional safety precautions. Green is an area where there is evidence of positive COVID cases in the community, but in general, we're not seeing widespread community spread. We're trying to keep those numbers low. At yellow is the area where we have a heightened exposure risk, but yet transmission is relatively controlled. And when we say that, that means that we're able to, in most cases, be able to say that when somebody becomes ill with COVID, a contact tracer is able to trace that back to a location or from somebody that they may have been exposed to. But at yellow, our concerns get higher, and that is a point where we as a district would look at moving to a hybrid model, which we'll talk about a little later. Orange and red, excuse me, is when we're dealing with significant transmission of the virus and a high risk of exposure in the community and in our schools. And orange and red is the time we would make that transition to the distance learning model. Distance learning, what we did last spring, however, the expectations for distance learning, now that we've had some opportunity to plan, are significantly more extensive. As a community, Governor Burgum has indicated that he would like to get to the point where we, as communities and as counties, would be able to declare our own color and be able to assess what that might look like. But we're not quite there yet. That being said, we do have a process in place that will allow for continuous communication with my office, the Office of Superintendent, First District Health Unit, and the building principal or the COVID-19 coordinator. And we would talk about various concerns and make decisions based on what we feel is best for our community. For example, we might be in green, but we might see an increase. As a state, we might be in green. We might see a drastic increase in numbers in our community, and that might have the district determine then that we might want to move into that hybrid model. So there will be a lot of people, again, involved in that decision-making process. We want that process to be based on facts and science, and we are fortunate that we have a great partner in First District Health that gets more specific information in regard to infection rates in the community and our school district, not just Ward County, for example, that will help us drill down and make some very well-educated decisions as we move forward. So what does this mean when we take that color scheme and we put it into a matrix to say where we would be at in these various stages? First of all, blue, or what Governor Burgum calls a new normal, would mean that school would be in session and that masks would be recommended but may not be required. And that would be at the discretion of the principal. If there were cases in the school, masks may be required even if we were blue. But blue is by far the least restrictive of the color phases that we're going to talk about today. Governor Burgum has indicated that the state of North Dakota now is in green. Okay? So green means that school is in session, but we have a lot of additional safety precautions that are in place. We want to enhance our cleaning and sanitizing procedures that will be happening in schools. Social distancing will take place wherever possible, but we have big schools, we have overcrowded schools. That's very, very difficult. Because of that, masks will be required in hallways, in commons areas when we enter the building up to the time we leave the building, and there will be mask breaks built in. But the expectation is that masks will be required in green and that students should provide their own mask. If they're unable to, we will have disposable masks available. And masks then again at this stage of the game would be in green, required on all district busing. Yellow is that area that we get a little more concerned, heightened possibility of spread. That would be in this stage that we would begin our transition to a hybrid model. The hybrid model would be that we would divide our student population in half, and maybe, let's say, students A through M go to school with Group A. Group B is N through Z. And we would divide out that way. We would have a specific schedule. We'd work through all of that and develop that with parents in mind. Enhanced cleaning, sanitation, again, social distancing is required. And because we would only have half of our students in attendance at any given time, social distancing then becomes much more of a reality. Masks required in all places in the building in yellow. Again, we would have mask breaks. And I did have a question that just came in. Somebody asked, does it have to be a face mask? It has to be some kind of a shield, face covering. So we have some families who contact us asked if shields are okay. The answer to that is absolutely yes. Masks would be, again, required on school district buses, and we would limit busing capacity to allow for social distancing. In orange, where we get very concerned about community spread, this would be, at this point, we would make that transition in the orange and red area to the distance learning model we'll be talking about here in a bit. This would involve no district transportation, very limited access to buildings, and masks would be required by anybody who was in the building at all times. In red, which would be the most restrictive, we would be looking at distance learning, of course, for our students, and our staff would be working from home, and schools would be closed to public and non-essential staff. So we would be very, very restrictive. I hope that gives you a little idea of what the proposal is. And again, we are in green right now, so following that guideline, the recommendation would be that we would begin in school in person. Possible examples of what that hybrid model would look like. The school icon would mean those would be the days that Group A would be in school, and then the Group B during that same time would be at home with online learning activities, and then on Thursday they would flip. And that process would just continue week after week. So it actually would rotate. So we would see examples where students would have 5 days in a row with their staff and then 5 days working at home. Another example would be, and we've not locked into any of these yet, another example might be a day on, day off for students, with Friday being a day for intervention and online learning that could take place, where teachers would be on Google Meet with students, or we could have opportunity for students to get extra help or enrichment with assignments. There's been no final determination as of right now on what that might look like. The one commitment we have discussed is we want to make sure that if we end up in a hybrid model, we want to make sure that families have the opportunity to make sure they're on the same grouping. So when the children are in school, older children will, on days off, they would all have the same days off and they could be together at home. That's a few ideas of where that. I do want to hit again on the distance learning. The distance learning will be much more rigorous than last year. It will parallel what goes on in the regular classroom on a day-to-day basis. And we will have some great opportunities for families to do that, to continue a fine level of excellence in education. Getting right down to the recommendations, the committee believes that the best thing we could do is delay the start of the school year until August 27th. That is going to give us that time, with our staff still reporting on August 18th, due to the necessary training to prepare for in-distance or in-person learning and our distance learning model. Classified staff will be notified when and where to report during those days. We also look at intending to start with students in person on August 27th. District will continue to evaluate those local number rates in our community, consult with First District Health, and you will be notified immediately if there are changes to that or if any changes to the initial plan are made. So our goal would be, if today was August 27th and we were green as a state, and we felt we were green as a community, that we would move ahead with in-person education for our students. We recognize that many of our parents are concerned about sending students back. They may opt for the distance learning option for that first 9 weeks. Therefore, any parent who wants to do that it will have an opportunity after that 9-week period to return to traditional instruction, or can opt to continue distance learning, but we do ask for that in a 9-week increment. We're going to have a deadline coming up if the board approves a plan of August 11th to help us determine staffing needs for the upcoming year. So there will be a very quick turnaround. And if you have questions about distance learning, you can certainly contact your child's principal. I believe that would be one of the best routes to take. And I do want to just reiterate that distance learning is not homeschooling. You don't have to file with the state to homeschool your child, and you don't have to provide the work. The time online will be provided by highly qualified Minot Public Schools teachers, as well as the assignments and any other information that the student may need. The one requirement, and it is very clear in the plan, is that we do need to have internet connectivity to do the distance learning. But if for some reason you don't and are having difficulty affording that, we ask that you reach out to your child's principal. We may have some help for you in that. I want to reiterate again the issue in masks. If we start in green, students attending in person are expected to provide their own masks. Mask requirements are outlined in the plan, very detailed, and that will vary according again to that color status that we're using. So a lot of really good information there, and that plan will probably delineate a little clearer for that in regard to everything that's going on. I'm going to ask the moderators to be prepared to come down come down with any questions that maybe have been submitted. I just want to, one of the things that we see oftentimes, I know, is that Governor Burgum begins his press conferences and ends his press conferences with gratitude. And I want to take this opportunity to offer my gratitude to the many people that made distance learning work as well as it did last spring. We had great teachers and administrators and parents and students that really worked hard to make that situation work in a way that wasn't always that positive. We were developing a plan very quickly. We kind of developed it. It was almost like building a plane and flying it at the same time. But I thank everyone for their creativity and their willingness to roll up their sleeves and go to work and make that the best possible event that it could. And that goes all the way down to our social distance graduation that we were blessed to have in the end of May. It was a great opportunity for us to gather and to celebrate those seniors. This may not be the way that we had hoped to begin our school year. If you would have asked me in the beginning of June, I would have said without a doubt there'd be no questions about coming back to school. But I do want to say that as we've watched these numbers and continued to work and evaluate all of the information that we have, it has not been an easy decision. And there's a lot of people that have really debated whether or not we should be in school in person or not. But at the end of the day, we are offering what we believe is the best plan, given the information that we have. And I just want to thank my committee that worked diligently on that. I also want to thank all of you that have provided input, that have took place in our part in our focus groups or the surveys. That is all valuable information moving this forward. And we will just wait now for questions to come down. It should be just a couple of minutes. Okay, we've got some questions. The first question is, what are smaller class sizes and what are maximum class sizes? And the question is that in face-to-face instruction green, we are operating with our normal class sizes with safety measures in place. Smaller class sizes will primarily happen when we are looking at a hybrid model and that would be about 50% of our normal class size. I do want to say that in elementary schools, it's a bit easier to cohort kids with a specific classroom that eat lunch together and recess together. And that gets a little more difficult as we get into high school where kids move hour by hour. But when we talk about smaller class sizes, that really gets to when we go to that hybrid model. Another question is, can we go in person for 9 weeks and then virtual for 9 weeks? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. Distance learning is an option for the entire year, but again, we're asking parents to declare for a 9-week period, and that helps us with staffing, and it helps also then if a student were to come back to the traditional model at the end of a 9-week period, that they would be joining at the start of a new grading unit, and it would be very positive for the student and for staff. We do want to say that we allow parents to choose in person, and if they're not comfortable with face-to-face learning, there will be a form coming out once the board approves the plan, pending they do, and that would be a commitment again for that 9-week period. Next, somebody asked a question about students on IEPs. Very, very important if we do have students who are on an IEP that opt for the distance learning model, we're going to have the IEP team gather and make a determination on what those services might look like. And that doesn't mean that a student on IEP cannot do distance learning, but it does mean that we're going to have probably a little cleaner opportunity or time to gather that information and make sure that everyone's on the same page. At the end of the day, we want to make sure that all of our kids have the best services that they possibly can. Next, if a teacher or student has confirmed COVID-19 and has been in school with a class, that the teacher will everyone in the class have to quarantine. First and foremost, I want to make it very clear that the school district does not require people to quarantine. Any recommendations for quarantine or requirements come from the North Dakota Department of Health or the First District Health Unit. We would be required to give them information of who is in the class, who is in close proximity to that student, and we will do the best to make that recommendations and get that information to them quickly. However, the state follows that basic 6 feet, 15-minute rule. If you're within 6 feet of somebody for 15 minutes, then you would be in a situation, I guess you could say, where you probably will be required to quarantine. But we as a school district don't do that. One thing that is very helpful, if you have or somebody in your home has been ordered to quarantine, we encourage you to call the school and work through that with them. I'm just going to keep going through some questions here. One is how much notice will you receive if the school district has to go to distance learning? We would look at a transition period, but it would be a relatively quick period. So one of the focuses that we're going to be working on with staff is making sure that we are ready to roll. That means that kids have access to the technology they would need. It would be a relatively quick process, but it would happen with enough time, hopefully, to allow you to take care of any needs for childcare and such that you may have. If there's a threshold for an outbreak at which Minot Public Schools will decide the virtual platform is more safe, again, that would be back on that. That would be back on that question or slide that we talked about. Those decisions will be made in correlation with the school, with the superintendent's office and the assistant superintendent by that level, with heavy emphasis from First District Health, who gets their lead from the North Dakota Department of Health. So those decisions would be made based on that. And we're going to be very cautious in making those decisions. And we want to keep people safe. So we're not going to be very we're going to be very, very cautious in moving forward with that. Also, what happens if a teacher teaches in a school, has a son in another school, and a wife at an additional school? Well, there's quite a bit. That's a really big question. When we look at part of the reason why wanting to keep that team A and team B, if we go to a hybrid model, the same, is we want to do everything within our power to keep families together. But if you're looking at that from a question of like an infection or quarantine, again, that's where we're going to have to lean on First District Health and the Department of Health to walk us through what would be the situation and who might be required to quarantine. What is being done specifically about classrooms with poor air circulation? We have our utilities crew working on that right now. I know some of the recommendations were that doors may be open, classroom doors going into hallways may be open. Also some training on how to properly use fans to move air around in a safe way. We do have, most of our buildings have pretty up-to-date HVAC systems, and we'll do the best that we can. And that I do know there's a lot of questions that have arisen about air conditioning, and the later start, I think, will help with that a little bit. We have had in past some really hot days in August, but we'll, starting a little later, hopefully will help with that. We'll be allowed to drop off early for working parents, and will breakfast times change? One thing I want to say is that the plan that's developed is a macro plan, the big picture plan, and there will be certain things that will have to be divided out in regard to how individual schools might be able to operate depending on their physical plant, what they have going on, how much space they have. CLC at this point plans on continuing, so if your child is in CLC, that will continue. And if breakfast times change, you'll be notified of that as a parent. Someone wants to know, will masks be required in elementary classrooms? Masks will be required in elementary classrooms, or some type of face covering. But again, those breaks will be built in. We certainly recognize that wearing a mask is very difficult for a lot, especially for some of our littles. And we will build in breaks for that. We'll also have some focus on different avenues for which we might be looking at, and maybe some better ideas or recommendations for masks or coverings for kids. If a child has seasonal allergies and has to sneeze or cough because of that, and they're not sick, do they have to miss school? The answer to that is no. What we're going to ask is that if you have new symptoms, and it talks a little bit in our guidance, and we're going to be enhancing that over the next day or so, it talks a little bit about the different types of concerns. And, if it's a new cough or a worsening cough or whatever, then, we might say you probably should go and see a doctor because you might be exhibiting those types of symptoms. And again, it's just, we have to take our own guidance on that. But if it's something brand new, then we would recommend that the child say, I have seasonal allergies. I have many issues with that, and I have a stuffy nose today. But that's most days, so I don't consider that a symptom. But if you have questions on that, we can always talk to the school office, or you can contact the school nurse as well. Okay, if lockers are not allowed, how will students be storing supplies and personal items? We're going to work on that very closely. I think those first couple of days to help students define what that might look like. What we're finding at the high school level, kids really aren't using their lockers very often. So we'll help to define that. And, we have students at those upper levels too that are using Chromebooks and have a Chromebook assigned to them, that most of the work they're going to be doing is on that Chromebook, and they're not going to be having to lug around a lot of information or extra items. So we will have more conversation coming on that one. The reason that we're not wanting to use the lockers is because lockers are congregate areas where people tend to gather in very close proximity, and it tends to kind of close up those hallways very quickly. There is discussion at the elementary, because in most elementary classes that have lockers or in the classroom, we probably would allow that to continue. Again, what happens if someone in the class tests positive? Does the whole class quarantine? Again, contact tracing from the state, and it probably would be people in the most close proximity that would have to, but that would be a decision outside of us. That is a decision that is essentially made by the North Dakota Department of Health with our assistance, but they would be the one who would lead that. Okay, so during distance learning, will the children be able to have virtual classes instead of just given assignment? Absolutely, yes. We'll be very, very detailed in how we do that. The expectation is that kids will be online in person, not in person, but online with an actual teacher for several hours a day. So that is going to be the expectation there. So please understand that we'll just do the best we can. But the distance learning is going to be a much heavier lift for students than it was. But there will be a lot of different options for families to engage in that if they choose to do that, if they feel that's best. You'll have to excuse me, I'm kind of jumping around here a little bit on the questions, and I don't mean to, but some of them have already been answered. There is a question here. If a IEP student would opt into virtual schooling, do they have to give up any service? That the goal would be no, but the IEP team would certainly have to meet and to define what those services would look like. They might not look the same as if the student is in school, but we will certainly not jump to any judgment on that, and that will be left up to the IEP team. Are teachers supposed to use their sick days when they're quarantined because of exposure? That is a very difficult question for me to answer, and whoever asked that, I'm going to ask that you call our HR department, and you can find out about how the CARES Act can probably blend together and help us determine, how that leave might look. And the CARES Act covers a certain percentage or a part of your leave, and then sick leave might also. But HR are the people that will have the best advice for us on that. Okay, as far as busing, will there be more busing options this year with the restrictions and drop-off times? Probably not more busing, but there may be those restrictions, and drop-off times and congregating in groups outside of schools are things that we're going to have to worry about. But at this stage of the game, we don't have more buses and we don't have more bus drivers, so we will most likely not be looking at additional busing services during this time. Someone asked that on page 24, it says students will have one-to-one technological devices. Does that mean that elementary classes will not have to share? During in-person, we may have times where classrooms will share in the elementary carts, but for those that go to distance learning, and if we go to a distance learning model, we will make sure that everyone has the technology they need to support that. We still have some work to do, especially with our kindergarten and first grade students. What is the best mode of technology? And it might not be a Chromebook, which our district has essentially bought into. It might be an iPad. So we just have to make sure we have the technology to do that. But if you are going one-to-one, or if we are going distance learning, we'll make sure that the child has accessibility to the technology, that they need. Okay, somebody said, why is this meeting virtual, but we can send our students and teachers back to school? If it isn't safe for a public meeting, it isn't safe for school. And thank you for sharing that. I certainly understand where you're at. I will tell you the reason we're doing this virtually is because we want to reach as many people as quickly as possible. And it is very difficult to do that in any type of setting in Minot. And, there's a lot of research out there, too, that talks about the infection rates for students. And that we have less possibility of students contracting the virus or spreading the virus, especially elementary age students. And this is an opportunity to reach as many people as possible. We thought it might be a better option to do something like this and have you be able to do this from your office or home over lunch than it would be to have people have to leave their office or home and come in to do that. Again, we had that question about if we have to make distance learning, how much time will we have? We'll give you as much notice as possible. It most likely would not be an immediate. We would be continually communicating our concerns with numbers to parents to help guide that discussion and process. What is the threshold for an outbreak at which MPS will decide a virtual platform? Basically, again, that decision is going to be made First District Health, North Dakota Department of Health, and with our input, and we'll work that through the best that we can. Another question, what are teachers supposed to use their sick days up? We've already answered that one. I think, again, staff, call HR. They're the experts. They can walk you through what that means. If a child had trouble wearing a mask, what should they do? First of all, we're going to work with families to help find some type of a shield or face covering that would work for the child. If somebody, however, does have a condition, a medical condition that won't, they can't wear a mask, then we will help, again, explore other options for that. Okay, I got another list of questions over here. I'm going to go through them as quickly as it can. One question, will students and staff have daily health screenings? And the medical experts right now are not recommending that because temperature, for example, is only one of the indicators of a potential COVID infection. Will be doing random checks. And of course, if any child will come down to the office not feeling well, they will be scanned in the office, and any visitor that comes into the school before they'll be allowed to go to the school will be, even in green, required to wear a mask, and will have to go through a screening, which will include temperature scans. And we do have ample temperature thermometers available. We have a question about the PACE program. Given the current protocols, what we're wondering is, will this program continue? PACE will continue. It might look a little different, especially for those students that come in on a one-day-a-week basis, but we will be working through that with parents, and you'll be receiving communication shortly. If parents of young kids don't have anywhere to go, the kids to go during the hybrid model, will they be given an opportunity to be in school every day? And I really can't answer. I could say no on that. It would be a very difficult situation. However, you can always reach out to people in your building. We might know of some places where might be able to help you out in that. At what point does North Dakota turn from green to yellow? There's 9 indicators the governor's office and the Department of Health use for that. I'm not familiar with all of them. Some of them are listed in that case. If it's a North Dakota decision, I know they're considering infection rates, death rates, cases of community spread versus contact tracing. And there's a lot of different input that could be involved with that. But at the end of the day, they will make that decision. But at any given time, we feel infection rates in Minot would indicate that we should not be green. We will make that determination, and we can move to a hybrid model or a distance learning model. We do not need permission from the state to do that, but that will be a group of local experts with heavy emphasis on the Department of Health and First District in making that decision. How will it work if I send my student to school but the teacher is doing distance learning? For those students that come to school, we are going to always have a teacher in front of them. And for the child that would be distance learning, they would also have a teacher, but that would not be maybe the same teacher as if they were personally in school. And that's why we need a relatively quick turnaround on this, so we can look at our staffing needs and assign folks accordingly to that. Would it be possible to move our start after Labor Day? Potentially. We've had a lot of discussion on that. It does involve a lot of things, including the amount of hours we need to meet our expectations with the state. So our desire was to start a little bit in a couple of days with students to get them in before the break and hopefully get the year off and running. Will you be provided a clearer picture of distance learning? Absolutely. Basically, our distance learning teachers are going to be following the expectations of the school district and of what would be happening in online instruction. So this is a really, really big thing, and we need to make sure that families do understand that lots of online learning time with an instructor, some independent work as well, but the idea would be the expectations are going to be much higher. Okay. Somebody wanted to know if we were waiting to start until August 27th. Is it going to delay or push our school year into June? The answer to that is no. We're going to be, we worry more about not days as much as hours. So it will not push our school year into June. Will there be grace period for parents if they decide whether or not they want to stay in school or distance learn? I think the best thing on that's something you're going to have to talk with your child's principal about. And if you're questioning whether or not you want to do the distance learning model at the beginning or learn traditional, make sure that you ask those questions to the best of your ability with the principal. We're here to help. Okay, I think is the bottom line. So, so if somebody said with verification that school would start on the 27th, the answer to that is yes. Mask, again, the question, are they going to be required to be worn? Yes, the answer to that is yes, but there would be mask breaks built in, and we'll be working on that on the individual school level. But the expectation is we're going to be needing to wear some type of face coverage. Question about distance learning. What if there is no camera on the laptop? A verbiage says that cameras must be on. I think that is an expectation. When we can do that, if there is a reason why we can't, we'll work to help get the technology needed to make that happen. Some of that was also, though, for staff. We want to make sure that staff in meetings and presentations to students that they have the camera on unless they're presenting. Okay. If desks are not be able to be socially distanced, masks required in the classroom? Yes, even agreeing. What happens to those 5 years of the date? Those are going to be training days for schools, but again, will not affect the end of the school year. Somebody made a comment here that why weren't parents, teachers, custodians, coaches, secretaries, on and on included in the planning? I just want to explain that we had a very large committee that when they had assignments to work on in that matrix that you see at the back of the plan, they reached out to many people. We have 1,650 employees in our district. We can't reach out to everyone. We have talked with bus drivers. We have talked to some custodians. We have talked to a lot of different people to help us make these decisions. So I know that there's a feeling out there by some that we didn't reach out to enough people. The bottom line is this: in the midst of crisis, we do the best we can. We have surveyed people. We have had focus groups. We have had parent focus groups to talk about distance learning. We did a survey with secondary students in the spring. We're gathering the best information we can in relatively short order once we got the final determination from Governor Burgum's office. This is the best that we can do, and this is an opportunity to work on this and to provide that input. And if this was an employee question, certainly you can reach out to me. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. If I did distance learning, would I be able to come to school one day of the week and turn in any papers and ask teachers questions? There would be time built in the distance learning model to do that. However, if there were specific requests, those would have to be handled on a one-by-one basis. But the expectation would be the distance learning assignments would be turned in through Power School. That would be basically our mode of operation for that. We talk, how will hands-on classes be handled? Well, if we're in school, they're handled the same way they are now. If we're in hybrid, we're still going to have that opportunity. If we're in distance learning, that's going to be a little tougher. And when we talk about that, we say that this is going to parallel the activities that happen at school during traditional, but it can't mirror. It can't be the same. If the shop teacher is adjusting a carburetor on a 76 Buick, we can't replicate that for the student home. But potentially through video, through other activities, we have an opportunity to do the best. Some of that's going to be a little more difficult to manage on the distance learning, but we will do what we can to still promote a high level of understanding and knowledge for all of our students. Can IEP students have services in person even if they're distance learning? Again, that is a very good question that really should be addressed with your child's case manager. And again, it would depend on the level of service needed. There's just too many variables in there that would make that hard to answer. Somebody wants to know, high schools, if we run on semester schedules, do you have to commit for the entire semester? No. Our goal would be, if you're going to do distance learning the first 9 weeks, you have the same schedule of classes. If you decide to come back for the second 9 weeks, you're going to roll right into those classes. That's why the emphasis on distance learning is so much more rigorous. We want to make sure that the expectations are incredibly high all the way across the board. So when you roll in second quarter, you're going to be able to do that. How close are we entering the yellow phase? I guess I can't speak to that as a state because that determination is made outside of my purview. I can tell you this, when you look at the barometer on the North Dakota Department of Health, we're relatively close to yellow, but that takes into consideration areas that have much higher impact. So areas, Fargo, West Fargo, Bismarck, they have much higher areas that will be evaluated over a period of time. And so, that's why I'm happy that we can work in conjunction with First District Health on helping to make these determines locally. And I can't sing the praises enough of First District Health. They have truly been rock stars in moving this forward. Okay. For multiple children, can one child go in person and one be virtual or distance learning? Absolutely. The family does not need to declare. We declare this on the individual child. So if you have a child that prefers to go distance learning in the first 9 weeks and one that plans to be in person, can you do that? Absolutely. Okay. Smaller class size are not intended for green. How are teachers supposed to space the students 6 feet? There will not be 6 feet spacing apart in the green. That's why masks are going to be are required, but we will not be able to space kids 6 feet apart in all cases during that time. However, our large classes, music classes, PE classes, things like that may look very, very different as well. And we talked earlier, macro to micro, that's really where we get into a lot of that. And I think the biggest issue with all of that is that now we need time to fine tune these by building and help develop those plans and get those out to everyone. If there is a positive case in the school, will distance learning be available even if it is the beginning of a new 9-week period? You know, again, if there is a positive in the school, we're going to address that. We're going to look at making recommendations on that. There's a very real possibility that that may be the impetus for moving us into the next model, depending on what infection rates are in the community and such. That'll all be part of that decision-making process. But if you're very, very concerned about that after that time, your principal is the right person to talk to. Okay. How we're going to address parish shortage in classroom and necessary quarantines. Again, as we look at moving all of this forward, a lot of the decisions we end up making might be made outside of the realm of not just infection rates in our community, but staffing needs and how many students are distance learning. So we'll always take that into consideration, but at the end of the day, we can't just assume that we will have a shortage of parents. We'll have to wait and see where we're at, or teachers who may be quarantined, or kids that will be quarantined. We'll have to address that as the time comes. And again, close watching of those numbers, having our contact tracing people ready to assist the state will all help in that process as well. Are there going to be specific teachers for distance learning? And the answer to that is yes. They will be divided up. We have to figure out how that'll work. Again, that is going to depend largely on the number of people that want to do the distance learning. And that is why we're doing all of that, as quickly as we can. We're going to ask for a response from parents no later than August 11th, if that's the intent they want to go. Lots of questions about lunch. Again, I'm going to just say that gets us down into that micro type of development. Lunch at Magic City might look different at Central because they can spread students out more, might mean multiple lunch periods. All of those questions will have to be answered at a later date. Somebody asked if we could put the color on Power School so we are aware. I will check with our tech department, but I think that potentially is a very good idea. I think we could maybe look at doing something like that, or maybe not on Power School, but on our webpage, some way that we could provide that. Will there be COVID testing? We worked with the health units on this. We are trying to get more availability to testing. I will tell you, we cannot require any child to be tested, but there has been opportunities for testing in mass in communities, but they have not come into the schools or committed to doing that yet. So we will be working through that. Somebody asked, what are the symptoms that would cause a child to be sent home from school and not allowed back until tested? And essentially, I don't know if it would be not allowed back until tested, but if you had new or worsening symptoms that are listed in that document, cough, fever, chills, sore throat, and again, I think the idea on that is new or worsening. Those might be if your child comes home and you say, wow, I have a fever, I have the chills, I have a bad cough, I didn't have that yesterday, I have a sore throat. It might be a good time to talk with the doctor, and the doctor would be the person to recommend that testing. But ideally, if those symptoms are new or chronic, then we definitely need to look at contacting with your family's medical provider. All right, I'm just continuing to go through. Great questions, everyone. I think we're at about 300 questions, and we're going to be putting together some kind of a Q&A document here and maybe combining the questions. I think the primary issue with this is that a lot of these questions, they're similar in nature. So we'll probably try to combine them a little bit, hopefully help to answer the questions for everybody. A lot of questions about these staggered bells for transitioning between classes. That's one thing that they're going to be looking at within their schedules. The other thing they're going to be looking at is one-way traffic in hallways as often as possible in stairwells to help limit overcrowding in particular areas. Okay. Again, mask in classroom, the expectation, you wear the mask into the classroom, you wear the mask in the classroom. We will certainly do what we can to clarify that better in the plan. My apologies for not being clear on that. Somebody asked if their child must quarantine because they were in contact with somebody. Will it be distance learning available? Absolutely. And we'll work through that with the family and see how that is. One thing we are going to ask is, there's a difference between quarantining and being sick. And we don't want to necessarily be hounding somebody if they're not feeling well. So we're going to ask that if you are quarantined, we're going to ask that you stay in touch with the school and let us know how things are going. Can I put the questions on the screen? I really can't right now. The model that we're using, it just does not allow us to do that, but we will be putting together a list of Q&A here. And there's a lot of questions, right? So it's going to take us a little time to do that. Will students have to carry textbooks to class all day? We're going to be working on that with teachers. I think the bottom line is fewer and fewer teachers are using the actual textbooks like we used to. I think we'll probably be seeing more activity directly on their personal devices. If students are required to go virtual, will parents be required to implement the service? What is going to be required is that you have internet connectivity, as we talked about. We'll provide the device for that. Yeah. Okay, I'm going through here a few more. We're kind of getting close to the end of our time. Will mass breaks be built into the schedule each day? Yes, there will be mass breaks available. Somebody said one of their concerns is PE. Very involved as far as what kind of options might be there for a high-risk child. Again, we'll work through that with the principal. Our goal is to keep the child safe, and we'll see what options might be there to make that work. Okay. Why is yellow hybrid a maybe? Shouldn't it be established in a plan? I will tell you the committee felt very strongly that, yellow is the time where we begin transitioning into that hybrid model. We might do a hybrid model with our secondary students before we do it with our, before we do it with our elementary students, because we can, again, cohort those elementary kids in smaller areas better than we can high school kids who travel class to class during the hours. So we make that transition at that stage based on the evidence, again, that we gather and the input from our medical professionals, including First District Health. Okay. Will teachers be required to teach both in-person and online classes? The answer to that is no. The expectation is, however, that, like at a secondary level, we might have an opportunity for a teacher for an additional 6th hour and compensation to teach an advanced algebra or something like that online. But in general, no. The expectation would be that the teacher would either be teaching in person or online. The expectation is not. The teachers will be doing both, which again leads me back to why August 11th is so important to determine if students plan on being distance learning or, really well. We're asking students to declare distance learning and an assumption that the others will be attending in person. Why are students moving from room to room other than teachers? I'll tell you, the high school, because they're not all going to the same classes. We have a very rich high school schedule that allows for students to, they go to many different areas. You might be in math class, your friend goes to English class 2nd hour, and you're going to a CTE class. So we move together like that. In the elementary, it's it's much more easy to keep them in the same room with the same teacher, and then bring the counselor or whoever might be coming into that classroom. But it's secondary. That's very, very difficult. Question about a staff member who is newer teacher, doesn't have much leave due to maternity leave on surgery. Again, any questions in regard to leaves for staff, I really encourage you on an individual basis, talk to our HR department, and we'd be more than happy to answer those. Have a couple more. Okay. We're getting a lot of repetitive questions now as we continue, so you'll have to apologize. It takes me just a minute here to use them. Questions: will some types of dividers, plexiglass, be used for desktops and tables? We're looking at different options on that. One of the biggest problems that we're running into right now is availability of those. We've seen some different options for some handmade types of pieces, which we could look at. But even finding plexiglass in the community right now is difficult. So that is kind of where we're at. Plan for parent-teacher conferences will be announced. We are planning our elementary open houses, though at the beginning of the year, are going to be spread out over the course of an entire day. People will be assigned a specific time to come in, and they will be socially distanced in small groups, so then parents might have more of an opportunity to ask specific questions to the teacher. Masks be required during gym class. It's probably one of the areas where they definitely will not be required. But if it's a gym class where they're all working in a classroom on a health assignment, might be. But when you're outside, for example, and that's the advantage this time of year, we're going to have a lot of people outside. Won't have to wear them outside. Would the forced online, if we were forced online, would the grading policies of last year be the same? And the answer to that is no. Through all of this, Governor Bergen's been very clear. He wants higher expectations in online learning and higher expectations for both attendance and grading. So we parallel the activity in the classroom, and we're following along at roughly the same pace. The expectations are going to be much more rigorous for online or distance learning. Are you holding teacher in-service meetings online rather than in person? And the answer to that is in some cases, yes, and in some cases, no. But most of the meetings are held in school and in individual school buildings with those staffs. Do students need a doctor's note if they can't wear a mask, or can they just tell their teachers that they have a medical condition? There's going to be some different kinds of expectations with that, and I think I go back to what we talked about a little earlier, and that's that idea that if we have specific kind of issues with that, a tactile type of thing, can't stand anything on your ears, we'll work with that family and that child to find something that might be more suitable. If we go to transition, if we transition to a hybrid model, somebody wants to know, can we opt out and go to distance learning? Yeah, I think there would be definitely opportunities then to do that. If we're changing the delivery model, we will look at that. And again, communication, I think, is just so crucial. If you have concerns, reach out to your child's principal, and we'll help on that. Some questions about high school and schedules. When are schedules going to be made available? Schedules will be made available soon. You'll be contacted by the school, and that probably will be immediately after we make the determinations as to who plans on distance learning this fall. As far as high school level activities and traveling, North Dakota High School Activities is allowing activity. It's been quite a process for us, but a decision was made last week by the WDA, Western Dakota, is that they're not going to be playing any games in the eastern part of the state. And we're also going to be limiting some of our middle school activity to more like in-town type of traveling. And again, our athletic directors are working closely with this. very, very closely to make sure that if there are infections in schools, we're not going to be traveling there to play. How will quarantine impact a child's sick days? Again, flexibility is a key. If you're quarantined, notify the school. Our biggest concern is not necessarily the number of days that they're gone, because if they are quarantined and they are able to go distance learning and able to keep up, they're not essentially absent from school. The only thing that has changed is the model of what we're going to be looking at. Somebody want to know if we will have nurses, RNs, LPNs at school, or have one assigned only to so many schools. We have a contract with First District Health, and our nursing time has already been determined. We will continue to work with them, but we will have options for making sure that our students do have input from school nurses. But I will tell you, school nurses are not going to be making determinations on, they may make a recommendation that you should see a doctor, but they're not going to be making any determination as to whether or not they think that child might have COVID or not, okay? Can the district scale back supply lists? I will certainly ask that, and we'll be talking with principals. We'll talk about that again. A lot of questions about band, jazz band, all of that. Music teachers have been meeting. There's quite a bit of information in there. I think the biggest questions that we're going to be facing through all of this is how can we best have those kids in and have them safe. So we're working on some different options in there. Potentially one is moving band and choir at the high schools, for example, that are very large groups into much smaller groups, and that should, or not moving them into larger areas where they can social distance. If a teacher is directed to quarantine, would they be able to continue to teach from home? And that again is a real tough situation. We need to have somebody in the classroom with those kids. We're working on some guidance right now, but again, we're going to be surveying our substitute teachers here to see how many of them plan on working this year. And we'll be as flexible as we can with that. But our goal with that would be, again, I can't commit wholeheartedly to that. It will depend on our staffing needs. I will also say, though, that if our staffing needs become so desperate with staff being out and substitutes not willing to work, we are going to have to work through all of those issues. So we're going to be getting some final guidance out on that shortly. Student has several children, one computer at home, and they're distant learning. How are they expected to do that? We have amped up our number of devices. So students 5 through 12 are all going to have their own device. Our elementary kids will have access to device. We'll work that out with you. But I will tell you, one of the concerns a lot of times has to do with the ability to have X amount of people online at the same time. So we're going to continue to work through that with families. But we will now have, we will be 1-to-1 for all students grade 5 through 12 this year. How will teachers be selected to opt for distance learning? Those are questions yet that we have to address. I would think that there'll be a lot of components to that. One component is, potentially if students are at high, or teachers are at high risk, but also, we need to have teachers that are doing the distance learning that are familiar with the learning platforms for online learning and feel confident in those abilities. So as time goes on, and we, again, August 11th, know those dates, we'll have a better idea on what that might look like. Will district be providing shields so that teachers of younger students? Yes, we're looking at shields as an option for all of that. So a very good way of dealing with all of that. Will the distance learning plan be available? Yes, we're working on that. And we'll have it out just as quickly as we can. It is nearly done, but it will look very much like this plan with the same type of matrix at the end, and it will help us determine, and you can see that. But again, the expectation is parallel to what's going on in the classroom. So, okay, and let's see. I'm thinking I have just one more. I have two more pages here we're going to go through. And question about people traveling between buildings and, like subs or OTs, PTs. Basically what we'll be focusing on is in our green phase, wear masks, follow those same types of protocols and procedures. When we get to yellow, that will definitely become much more restrictive because we'll want to limit exposure. So we'll be addressing that as it comes. But in the green phase, where we are as of today, that subs would be able to sub one day at McKinley and the next day at Roosevelt, but we would follow the same criteria with Mass. Somebody would know the hybrid model has not yet been decided. Are we considering other options? And the answer to that is yes. We're going to be gathering together with principals and teachers on the 18th to look at some different ideas of what that model might look like. Summer school, we use the hybrid model, day on, day off, Friday for interventions. Some teachers really like that. Other teachers felt it would be better to have kids for multiple days in a row. Because when you have multiple days in a row, you can build together on skills and have a lesson one day, use practical application the next day, wrap it up and put a bow on it, for example, the third day. But those are decisions that we need to look at yet. And, a lot of it depends on practicality of what we're teaching. What I want to make sure is we keep families on the same schedule. So we're not having, a deal. I have to have my third grader at school today, but my sixth grader is home and my senior goes tomorrow. So we want to keep those days in correlation because that makes it easier for families. Will fans be allowed at sporting events? And again, WDA is talking a little bit more about that. At this point, we're not selling season tickets yet, debating about whether or not we will. Some of our venues allow for more social distancing than others. Some do not. So we have a final determination. I think the bottom line we're telling people is, probably parents only at these events, and try to limit, the huge exposure to people in the community coming in with that. So that would be the goal. Let's see. What happens with sports in yellow? Basically, what you'll see with sports in yellow is that it will just become more and more restrictive. And it will be based on infection rates in the community. It'll be based on potentially in a school. But as that continues to go down, yellow would probably mean maybe some scrimmage type things locally or opportunities for kids to work out, but probably absolutely no competition. Again, depending on what phase of yellow we're at. Let's see. Possibility of extending time for students coming to lunch. Will nutrition staff be required to work more hours? Again, that is something that we have to just work through and determine what our specific needs are. First thing that's going to help us more than anything else is when we determine how many families or students intend on taking advantage of the distance learning option, how many plan to be in person. And then again, school by school, lunch areas, accessibility, all of that comes into play with that. So there will be, as we begin to take that and right size it, then that is going to be a very, very important idea for us to move through. So will it mean more hours? Maybe, but maybe not. And those are just things that, while I would love to give you specifics on, I can't right now. And that's, again, want to reiterate, and someone else had asked the question that if the committee couldn't get this all squared away in 3 weeks, what are we supposed to do as teachers? So here's the bottom line. We will have many things that we will have to do as we move this work forward. And we will look and we will search and we will adjust and we will make the best decisions that we can with the best amount of time and effort and input as we can. Bottom line is, we have spent a summer planning for things that never came to fruition. We spent a summer planning, early summer, thinking that we were green, well on our way to blue. We would be back without any restrictions, and that has all changed. As our reality changes, our reaction changes. I just want to remind everybody that there's a lot of people doing the absolute best work that they can, and our goal is to move this forward and do right by people. And if you have concerns with that, and you have specific concerns about a building that your child is in, reach out to the child's principal. They're here to help. We're going to do the best that we can to make that work. Two other questions I have here. One is, who will be teaching those online courses? Again, we'll know more once we get that determination of who plans on accessing distance learning. And how does social distancing work at lunch? Again, we're looking at a lot of different options for lunch. It might mean in elementary schools that one day a week those students eat in their classroom. Some students might eat outside. We might have to extend lunch periods out. But again, when we know better how many kids will be in school, we will move that through. Just a couple of things before I sign off, because I think we hit the end of the questions here. I want to thank you all for your input. Awesome that you were able to take part in this, and I hope that this has been helpful for you. We will be putting together a Q&A based on the questions that have been asked, and we'll get that out just as quickly as possible. I do say, however, that please understand, if your question wasn't answered specifically today, I did not read your question. It wasn't because I was trying to avoid anything. We were trying in a very quick manner to kind of combine questions and get some things together to answer to the best of our ability. These questions will be reviewed again. Answers will be posted. We're going to be doing 2 more of these sessions again today. So again, I just want to take this opportunity to thank you all for what you have done, what you continue to do to support our most valuable resource, and that is our kids. So once again, thank you, and have a great day.